Good evening, everyone. So I'm Michael Stone. I'm Chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. Delighted to be joined today by Felicity Buchan, the MP for Kensington, and Andrew Boyd of BGM Accountants, who are sponsoring the event. We're just going to wait just a few seconds while everybody connects and joins in. What I can tell you about basically the Chamber of Commerce has been going for over 50 years, supporting businesses in Kensington and Chelsea. We've been holding online events for the last 10 months, trying to help businesses through the coronavirus pandemic. And we're going to be having a series of events with the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea over the next 2 or 3 months, which is about trying to get businesses back into working back to normal and trading profitably again. So it's going to be quite an interesting time over the next few months. Felicity Buchan has been the MP for Kensington since 2019, has a 150-seat majority, member of the Treasury Select Committee and also the Finance Committee in the House of Commons since March 2020. Felicity, good evening. How are you today?
I'm very well, and it's great to see you all. I see a number of very familiar faces and also some people I don't know, so good to meet you.
Thank you, Felicity. And Andrew, BGM Accountants, so thank you very much for sponsoring today's event. How are you today?
Thank you, Michael. And we're delighted to have Felicity here, and we're very proud to be able to sponsor an event like this. Felicity was excellent in the lead up to Christmas with her Q&A session with regard to what to look for and how to prepare for Brexit. And I think an even bigger moment faces the country over the next, and in particular our borough over the next few months as we open up after the pandemic. So thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Thank you, Andrew. So we're going to have a sort of question and answer format. If anybody's got a question, you can either hold your hand up, which you can click on the raise hand at the bottom of the screen, or you can just type a question straight into the chat, and we can basically just read out your question and ask Felicity, or we can kind of cut to you on the video and you can ask Felicity directly. I can start off the process. Felicity,
Michael, sorry to interrupt. Would you like me just to make a few introductory remarks just in terms of how I see the outlook, or would you like to go straight into Q&A? I'm relaxed.
No, you go for it.
Okay, great. Well, great to see everyone. And I also just want to say what a pleasure it is to be one of your patrons. I know that I'm in rather esteemed company, so it's great to be one of your patrons. And before everyone dialed in, we were just talking about the fact that we have now lined up Paul Scully, who is the Minister in charge of small businesses in the business department. So he will be addressing you on Thursday, the 25th of March, so a few weeks' time. And Greg Hands, my neighbouring MP in Chelsea, will also be joining that session. So it's great to have Paul lined up. Clearly, we're at a very important point, as Michael said. It's great to have the roadmap out there. You know, there are some businesses who have said to me, isn't it overly cautious? But one of the reasons for the cautious approach is to make sure that this is our final lockdown. And I do know that a lot of businesses did find the stop-start approach last year, especially in the run-up to Christmas, quite difficult. So the reason behind this slightly cautious approach is to make sure that it is almost irreversible. We cannot say it's absolutely irreversible, but no one wants to be going into another lockdown. Clearly, we have the budget tomorrow. I don't know what is in it. I have been spending an awful lot of time lobbying the Chancellor, but in the months pre the budget, Treasury very much so goes into listening mode. So we can make representations, we can give our asks, if I can use those terms, but we don't get much feedback. So I'll be speaking in the budget debate tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to be saying because I'm only going to hear what the Chancellor says when he says it. But, you know, I'll tell you very candidly the themes that I have been pushing for. I have been stressing the importance of London, and I know you as a Chamber of Commerce and the London Chamber of Commerce have been hitting home that message. You know, we're all in favour of levelling up, but we all need to recognise that London is the engine of our growth, and we cannot hurt London in order to benefit the rest of the country, because it's London taxes that are helping the rest of the country. So Northern Ireland, the northeast of England, they need London to be successful in the same way as we need London to be successful. So very much so focused on London. This is less a business point, more for residents, but I have been lobbying for stamp duty to be changed because I do think that stamp duty is a tax on social mobility. I've got to be honest, I don't think that we are going to see a reduction in stamp duty in this budget, but it's definitely a theme I have been pushing at. Business rates is also something that I continually talk about. Now, clearly, business rates raise an awful lot of money for the Treasury. However, it is penalising our high streets. We do need to get our high streets back up and running. We've clearly had the consultation. Again, I don't think we'll necessarily get announcements on business rates tomorrow, but it is very much so a theme that I have been pushing on. The other thing I've been pushing on, and I don't think this will happen, which is a good thing, is that wealth taxes would be completely unacceptable for central London. So I keep on ramming home that message. But anyhow, we'll have the budget tomorrow and we'll see how all of that falls out. I think looking ahead for the next 6 months, I'm actually quite optimistic here. You know, the vaccine program has just gone incredibly well, way better than most of our expectations. We've got the roadmap. We've got a program of support. Now, it may not always be as comprehensive as we would like, but it has been very substantial, the program of support. You know, clearly we do face issues. You know, we've still got a stay and work at home policy. I'd like to see that lifted quickly because it's very important for central London that we get commuters back into central London. We've clearly seen a huge fall off on visitors, especially international visitors and tourists. The more we get the vaccine deployed, the greater confidence there will be with these international visitors returning. London has also seen a drop in population. Now, I think a lot of that is likely to be temporary. I think it's likely to be people going off to second homes or going off for 6 months back to France or Russia or wherever. But I do think it's important that we get high earners and wealth generators back into London. And the other thing I'm also focused on is that a lot of businesses, both small, medium and large, have taken on a lot of debt over the course of the last 12 months. And I think that we're going to have a solution to some of that debt, because I don't think that companies are necessarily going to be able to service all of the debt that they've got on their books. And we don't want these zombie companies that are just functioning to service debt and which have got no growth. Because I very much so want to see us growing our way back to recovery and growing our way out of debt. Now, I think realistically, there are going to have to be some form of tax increases, whether we see them in this budget or once growth is more back on track. The last thing that we want to do is to force up taxes hugely, and that chokes off growth. But I think that we will have to ultimately see some tax increases, but I very much so want it to be a growth-led recovery. So just some introductory remarks. Now let's go over to questions. The one thing I would like to say is that if your questions are very detailed, I've got to admit that I'm not on top of every last detail on every last scheme. So if there's a question that I cannot answer, I will note it and we will come back to you. And a lot of the schemes are also discretionary schemes that are run by the council. So it may be that I will have to go back to the council, but very happy to follow up with any questions that I cannot answer.
Okay, thank you, Felicity. So if anybody's got any questions, just hold your hand up on the screen, or just type a question into the chat box and we'll take it from there. So on the business rates, said the Retail Gazette was quoted in February that the government had urged councils not to send out business rates bills until after the budget tomorrow. So it sounds like there's going to be some sort of news for business rates tomorrow. So that's kind of fingers crossed. But kind of Kensington and Chelsea is kind of very much a hospitality-based borough with kind of the Science Museum, the V&A, restaurants, hotels. The Royal Garden Hotel was going to be closed for all of 2021. What can the government do to bring kind of tourists back to Kensington, Chelsea and London?
Well, I think the biggest thing is confidence, and we achieved that through the vaccine rollout. So that is the biggest thing. I know that we've had conversations, or I've had conversations with some people about VAT RES. So that was tax-free shopping that actually went on January the 1st, but that is still something that I continue to talk to Treasury about, because I think that encourages international visitors. Clearly, our government did announce over the weekend that additional grants will be made available. So £5 billion for grants of up to £6,000 for non-essential retail and up to £18,000 for hospitality, leisure, gyms, the beauty and personal care sector, all of which will be in lockdown for a more prolonged period of time. But I do think it's going to be very important that we all work collectively, and that's me, the council, it's you, it's also the cultural sector, because we do need to re-establish London's global brand as the place that you want to be, whether it's to do business or to visit. And I think that's going to take a lot of collective work, also working with agencies such as Visit Britain. But the support package, or the temporary support package to get people through until reopening, will be announced in more detail tomorrow. But I feel as though we're almost at the end of the road here. So I think government does really get it, that it does need to provide support in this last 3 months before we can fully unlock as of June the 21st. And I'm hoping that Rishi will set that out very clearly tomorrow in the budget, that we are here for the last 3 months, because the last thing that we all collectively want to see is that businesses who've been able to get through the last year aren't able to get through the final 3 months. So I'm hoping that that support package is there in place. Oh, and just one completely random matter. I just see that Tony Devonish is also in the audience, who's our GLA member. So if anyone's got any questions to him also, I see that he is in the audience.
Okay. Hi, Tony. So Eat Out to Help Out certainly made the restaurant busy last summer. Do you think there's a chance that will come back in again this summer?
Well, Andrew Marr actually asked the Chancellor that, I believe, on Sunday, and he was non-committal. To be honest, I don't think that we will see that. I think it did a very, very good job of getting hospitality up and running. I know that there was some criticism of it. Was it a good idea to get people socializing when we weren't COVID-free? Although clearly rates had fallen significantly in the summer. It's very interesting that if you look at the areas which had the most eat out to help out, they were actually the areas with the lowest COVID rates. So in the data, there's no correlation between eat out to help out and COVID rates. So places like Devon and Cornwall had by far the highest claims, but had incredibly low rates. But I just think, given that noise, and I just want to be pragmatic, if I were a betting person, I would think that that scheme would not be reintroduced just because of the noise. But it is simply noise. There's no data to justify it.
Okay, thank you. So as part of your role in the Treasury Select Committee, you've just released a publication about how to rebuild the economy after coronavirus, tax after the coronavirus. What are the key findings from that?
Yes, well, just by way of background, these reports that come out of select committees, it's quite a tortuous process coming to a conclusion, because we have got 10 members of the Treasury Select Committee, 5 of which are Conservative, 4 of which are Labour, 1 of which is Scottish Nationalist, and we've got a chair who is Conservative. And we've all got to agree on a joint report. And let me tell you, that is a challenge, and it takes hours and hours of arguing. So last week, yes, almost every morning, it seemed to be an 8 o'clock call with the Treasury Select Committee to hammer out some wording that we could all agree to. The biggest fights, as you can imagine, were on taxation. So we had a big fight on windfall taxes and a big fight on wealth taxes. But I think, stepping back for a moment, what were the big conclusions? Well, one, and you may not like to hear this, but was that we did think that there was some room on a short-term basis to increase corporation tax. It's been talked about in the papers, potentially going up to 25%. I think that's too high. I think that 23% is the absolute cap that I would like to see. But clearly corporation tax is a tax on profits, and clearly we have reduced it very, very substantially. So that's why we thought that there could be some room in corporation tax. We came out absolutely against any recurring wealth tax. We effectively came out against a one-off wealth tax, but just in this negotiation with Labour, we couldn't say that absolutely 100% clearly. But, the tone of the report is all against a one-off wealth tax. We also came out against a windfall tax, because I think that that is very, very difficult to do as a retrospective tax. What we have, however, said is that we do think that there needs to be a rebalancing of the high street. And so we did introduce, as a government, the digital services tax last year. And we've said that we want more international agreement on how we effectively tax these big internet companies. And I would like to see that implemented. But very much so, the tack that we have taken is that there are some taxes that can increase. We've also put into the report a section on greening the economy, and that tax can be used to green the economy. Now, the obvious tax there is to increase fuel duty. That has been paused for the last 10 years. There was not a consensus on the Treasury Select Committee to do that. But my own view is that having paused that tax for 10 years, I think that we probably could have had some room to increase it. But I do think the mood music coming out of number 10 and number 11 is that fuel tax will not go up. But I personally think that there was maybe a bit of room to increase that. But those were the key highlights from the Treasury Select Committee report.
Yeah, so I think the conclusion is taxes are going to go up, but we're not sure who's going to pay yet. But businesses, small businesses and a lot of big businesses will be paying more corporation tax shortly. I have a question from Claire Fountain, who is the head of residential property development at TWM Solicitors. So Claire, what's your question for Felicity?
My question is, I just wondered whether there'd be any guidelines for employers who have various or indeed many staff showing a reluctance to return to the workplace because their only means of doing so is via public transport.
Yes, I don't think that we're going to see that tomorrow in the budget, but I think it is a very good point. At the moment, the guidance is still work at home, if at all possible. But yes, I think it is going to be very important that we do have more confidence in public transport. And that's important, one, for getting staff back. It's also very important for our visitor economy that people are happy to take the tube to go to the South Kensington museums, or I see Chris is on the line to the wonderful Museum of Brands on Lancaster Road. So I do think that that confidence is very important. Now, that confidence will increase as vaccines get further rolled out. I am not aware of any new guidance being released imminently, but Claire, I can definitely look into that and see if there's any time frame, and I can come back to you via Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felicity and Claire, for the question. So if anybody has any questions, just put your hand up. So we've got Richard Howson.
I'll mute myself. Hi, Felicity, just a quick question on business rates, actually. We've got an office, we're actually based in Fulham rather than Kensington and Chelsea, but I like the Kensington and Chelsea Chamber of Commerce. But we've got an office where the top 2 floors were rented out to a tenant who left at the end of January last year. And so therefore it was empty. And obviously since then, there is absolutely no way of getting anybody back in there. I mean, it's a no-no. Now, as far as business rates is concerned, you get a 3-month business rates holiday when somewhere becomes empty. But since then, for 9 months, we're expected to pay £20,000 in business rates for a property that is completely empty. And the bigger hit also is we're not getting rent for it either. So we've got a real double hit on that. And what might be a nice thing for the government or councils to consider is that actually the empty rates, which was brought in as a restriction that you could only have it for 3 months, should be extended where you can't let a property at the moment, because I think I shouldn't think there's anybody on the screen. If I asked anybody to put a hand up, anybody interested in renting some office space in Fulham at the moment for nothing, put your hands up. That gives you some idea. In other words, if I wanted to rent it, I'd actually have to pay someone to go in there. So that's the question anyway, Felicity.
Yes, I hear you. That's a very difficult situation. I'd say a couple of things. One is that councils have received a lot of discretionary grant money, especially when businesses have been unable to make certain payments. So I know that Hammersmith and Fulham is obviously Labour controlled, but I do think it makes sense to talk to them to see if there's any discretionary money that is available. And on the K&C side, Catherine Fox at the council and her team are doing an excellent job in terms of administering these discretionary grants. And anyone on the K&C side who's got similar issues, I would encourage you to email Catherine directly, or if you don't know Catherine, you can email my office and we can forward it on to Catherine and her team. But the general point from a policy perspective, I'm very, very happy to feed in that particular issue and see if it is something that can be addressed. But definitely talk to your local council to see if there's discretionary money available.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicity. So next we've got a question from Marie Stedman. Marie, would you like to ask the question?
Hi, it's more actually. It's an Irish.
Sorry, apologies.
Yeah, no problem. Basically, it's following on from that in terms of premises, because what's happened really is that the government have come up with these guidelines about hospitality and retail, and understandably, I mean, they've taken a huge hit, but so have other people. So I'm a psychotherapist, and nobody wants to rent my rooms, and like the last person who spoke really, so everybody is working from home, and I have like quite a few rooms that are empty, sitting empty there, and I'm, you know, obviously paying for the whole lot. So that's one issue around that, because we're being told that it's coming from central government, the whole notion of the kinds of grants that can be made available by the, you know, the various councils, and I'm spread across a couple of boroughs. So that's of great concern to me, really, because it does seem to be, and as I said, I understand the retail and hospitality support, but you know, there are other people who've taken big hits. And the second thing is really people who have small businesses and are directors have had actually no support during this whole pandemic. And I know that's been a bit of a bone of contention, and I'm just wondering if that might be addressed in any way, particularly if you haven't had any support and you're paying out an exorbitant amounts of money, really.
Yes, just on that last point, Treasury Select Committee, goodness, this was probably about 6 months ago, did put out a report on those who had fallen between the gaps or when there were cliff edges. So they had just fallen at the wrong side of the cliff edge. We'll have to wait and see what is in the budget tomorrow. I don't want to get your hopes up that there is going to be additional support. I tend to think that if we were going to have seen that, we would have probably seen it already. I just want to be transparent and candid. But I think that we really just need to wait for the budget. But I don't want to get your expectations up. And then in terms of your comment that mirrored Richard's one, I will definitely feed that into Treasury and MHCLG. So that's the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and they're actually in charge of the business rate process, and they're also in charge of the grant schemes. And I hear what you said, that councils don't have full discretion. You know, every different grant does have parameters, but I will definitely feed that in, and we'll write to the Treasury tomorrow morning, and I'll give you any feedback that we receive.
I mean, that would be really, really great, because it's just, you're a hidden service when you're a psychotherapy service, because we cover an awful lot of people and an awful lot of people in prestigious positions, but we can't obviously reference them. You know, you have people like Jack Straw, who has come out and said about how much he's benefited from, and Alistair Campbell and people like that, and you know, obviously the royal family, and people have said about how therapy has been beneficial, but we're a hidden service in that sense, so we can't publicize who the people are that we've actually been seeing.
Yes, I understand.
Okay. Just as a follow-up to that one, Felicity, lots of the small business owners have been paying themselves the salary and the dividends and not been able to benefit from the government help. I think there's kind of over 1 million of them. So with the corporation tax rises coming in potentially from next month, they're going to go straight from having nothing to paying more corporation tax and bearing the kind of the brunt of the tax increases.
Sorry, I was on mute and I couldn't get myself off. Yes, so the reason why Treasury initially took the approach that if you've been paying yourself in dividends as opposed to a salary, you cannot get the benefits of these schemes was twofold. One, they thought it was just going to be very difficult to prove that those dividends were in effect in lieu of salary. You know, could the dividends be coming from income and returns of assets that have got nothing to do with a salary? That was one issue. And the second issue was HMRC was very, very concerned about how they were going to implement such a scheme, and they were concerned about fraud. So those were the two reasons. Now, I know that various bodies have come up with potential schemes and potential limitations to fraud, but to date, HMRC and Treasury haven't been convinced that they are robust enough. But I hear your message that there are people who haven't benefited from these schemes. And obviously it does look as though corporation tax will be going up. So I hear you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next, we've got a question from Michelle.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. Thank you, Felicity, for coming today. I just got maybe one or two questions. First question is just going on from what another speaker said regarding discretionary grants. I think one of the huge problems is that you can't actually get them. I mean, my business address is actually registered in another borough, which I'm going to be changing soon, frankly. And I tend to trade in Kensington. And what I found is that every single borough around the country, not just in London, is implementing their own schemes. There are some boroughs who are giving discretionary grants of up to £5,000 to businesses who work from home. Others are only giving it to businesses who have an office. There are some boroughs who have been so stringent that even if you have an office, they are saying, we're not going to give you a grant because you're in that particular building. So they're being so fussy with regards to where your building actually is located. And I feel that it's a really undemocratic system because you're not actually judged on your need. And, you know, I think that also it's a system that is totally oversubscribed. So even if there are, say, 100 businesses that need the discretionary grant funding, you know, you've only really allocated money for, say, 50. So even if you have a legitimate cause and you should be on the list of, a receiver of that grant, you're never going to get it because it's oversubscribed. And I just wanted to know whether you're planning on doing something about that, whether there's some kind of system that's going to be put in place, because a lot of people have just missed out. And, you know, those who are fortunate enough who have had that support for a year have been able to somehow miraculously survive. But it's pretty undemocratic that we've been left to kind of pick up the pieces and effectively try and keep our businesses going on fresh air, really.
Yes, so government deliberately gave the money to local authorities because they felt as though local authorities knew the community best and that they would know where the money could be effectively deployed. But that does give rise to the fact that different local authorities, as you say, Michelle, have done different things. So I'm sure K&C is doing different things from Hammersmith and Fulham, but that is just by the very nature of delegating powers down to local authorities. I hear you that some businesses have received discretionary grants, others haven't. What I would encourage you to do, if you haven't received a discretionary grant and you feel as though you should have, or you've got a good case, all I can really encourage you to do is to write in either to Catherine Fawkes at K&C or at her equivalent at Hammersmith and Fulham. Catherine is trying to look at this holistically, but obviously she does have to work under parameters. It's not complete at her discretion, but we have certainly been feeding into Catherine and her team businesses that have approached us who seem to be making a good business case. You know, it's not for me to assess whether they should get the grant. That will be for Catherine and her officers, but we've certainly been feeding in names of businesses that have approached us. So I hear your frustration, Michelle. All I really can do is to encourage you to talk to the council if you haven't already done that.
Thank you, Michelle, for your question. Next, we've got a question from Chris Griffin, of the Director of the Museum of Brands and also a member of the Chamber's board. Chris.
Oh, thank you, Michael, and good evening, Felicity, and thank you for all you've said. I've agreed with so much of it, but I have a query on a borough matter, which is the cladding inquiry and voting last week, where I think you voted against the sort of the mood of the area, as it were, on making the constructors responsible for the buildings that they may have just put up, and with the sort of the housing crisis that we have, some of these new flats say that these builders are putting up are becoming unsellable because they can't resell them because of the fire regulations and the potential bankrupting bills that they'll have for being held responsible for bringing the buildings into spec.
Chris, good to see you, and thanks for raising that, because it's a good opportunity for me to explain what's going on. Fire safety bill went through Parliament on Wednesday, and there were various Lords amendments. And then separate to that, a fortnight ago, and let me start off on that, government announced a very, very substantial package of money for cladding remediation. Now, I've been meeting with the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, almost on a weekly basis, basically to say, I need money, or we need money for cladding remediation. And I also met with the Chancellor of the Exchequer a few weeks ago on the topic too, because obviously the Chancellor is the one who controls the purse strings. Now, I had been calling for 5 to 10 billion pounds. Government announced a package, which I think is actually going to come out at the top end of that range. And not to get into too much detail, but just so you know what the package entails. We had made last year 1.6 billion available for cladding remediation. There is an additional 3.5 billion. So that takes that to 5.1 billion for high-rise buildings. And high-rise buildings are buildings defined as being over 18 meters. And that's not just some random level. What Dame Judith Hackett, and she's the one who did the report after the Grenfell tragedy, she has recommended that level, as have various fire chiefs, because that is the level at which the risk of fatality goes up hugely. So actually it's 4 times as great a risk of fatality in over 18 meters. What we've also said is that for buildings 11 to 18 meters with cladding, that government will heavily subsidize the cladding remediation. And so we'll cap that off at a maximum of £50 per month, which effectively makes it almost an increase to a service charge. It's not actually taking away all of the potential liability of the leaseholder, but it's capping it at a relatively manageable level. Now, it's unclear exactly how much that will cost the Treasury because it depends upon take-up, but I would have thought certainly of the order of 2 to 3 billion, that subsidy. And then what government has also said is that it is going to put a levy onto developers of high-rise buildings. So every new high-rise that goes up, government will put a levy onto that. And there will also be a tax on the residential property development sector going forward, with a view to raising £2 billion. And I'm not sure if anyone on the line is in the residential development property sector, but that will be a new tax, and further detail will come out tomorrow. And I have also, and I'm going to say this formally, I've also been encouraging government to consider a tax on the building product sector, because certainly some of the evidence coming out of the Grenfell inquiry has been very, very bad on that sector. So residential property development sector, yes, but also on the building product sector. So those are the government announcements, enormous amount of money. I've got to say, if someone had said to me last year, when Treasury announced 1 billion in the budget, that you will be able to get a further 5 to 10 billion, and likely at the top end of that range last year, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have so taken that. So I do think it is a huge result. But Chris, as you alluded to, there were 2 amendments last week, which, sorry for the detail, and I know that not everyone's going to be focused on it, but let me just talk about those 2 amendments. One was specifically to say that certain parts of the Grenfell inquiry should be implemented. Now, one, that amendment was unnecessary, and secondly, potentially it was confusing the process, because what government needs to do is to pass this fire safety bill and then to implement fire safety orders, which we've already consulted on. That consultation closed in October. But it's basically a series of legislation. And until you do step 1, then step 2 cannot happen and step 3 cannot happen. And this approach has been completely vindicated, validated by Dame Judith Hackett, also by the chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council, Roy Wilshire. So I don't want to be political on these calls, but all of the independent people are saying that if you want this to be implemented as quickly as possible, then you need to do what government is doing. And I think putting that amendment forward was not helping in any way the speed of implementation. And to be honest, it was just playing politics. It was getting government MPs to vote against an amendment, which the opposition was saying was the Grenfell amendment. But I can swear to you, I am doing everything to get the Grenfell inquiry implemented as quickly as possible. And I am taking advice from the likes of Dame Judith Hackett and the Fire Chiefs Council. And I am completely assured that the way the government is doing it is the quickest way to get this implemented. So that is that amendment. The second amendment was saying that leaseholders should not be responsible for any payments that relate to fire safety. Now, we'd all like to say that leaseholders aren't responsible, but the reality is that one of these bills could be, we just don't know the full extent. And I don't think, and I'm just going to be very honest, that Treasury is ever going to take on an open-ended commitment. Now, what people behind that Lord's amendment said was, well, cannot government pay in the first instance, and then they can go off to freeholders and try and get reimbursement from freeholders? Well, what government is doing, and they're doing it with some success, is to try and get freeholders to cough up the money now. And so about 50% of buildings have been paid for, not by government, but by freeholders, property developers, insurance companies. And, you know, I saw that Taylor Wimpey this morning announced that they were now going to make available £125 million. So there's a lot of pressure going on behind the scenes. But I think if government simply says to freeholders, we'll pay now, and now we're going to try and claim it off you, I think the reality is that government is not going to be able to reclaim all that much money, because a lot of these freeholders, one, we don't even know who they are. A lot of them are companies in the Cayman Islands. Secondly, a lot of these people were earning, you know, pretty slim amounts of ground rent relative to what the payments may need to be. And so I get concerned that lots of them, one, they may be uncontactable. Secondly, that they just declare bankruptcy. And so it just comes back to government. And I don't think Treasury is ever going to make an unlimited check available. So I thought that the intention of that amendment was very laudable, but I just did not think that it practically worked. And indeed, the advice I was getting from a legislative perspective was that it just wasn't watertight. It would just not hold firm as a piece of legislation. And I don't think it's the answer to what are undoubtedly big problems, is to pass legislation which isn't good. And Chris, you also raised the issue about some people just not being able to sell their properties. And the reason for this is that now banks, in order to approve mortgages on medium and high risk buildings, are requiring what is called an EWS1 form, which stands for External Wall System Form. And unless you get that form, then banks aren't giving mortgages. But what government is doing is working very, very closely with the Chartered Surveyors Institute and with banks in order to ensure that mid-rise buildings and buildings without dangerous cladding don't require these forms. And so announcements are due to come out in the next few weeks, which should mean that the need for these forms, they will stay on the very high risk buildings, but for other buildings, they will go, and that should get the property market going. And what I'm also talking to government about is insurance premiums, because insurance premiums on some of these buildings have gone up very, very significantly. And is there any way that we can do, like we've done with flood insurance and terrorism insurance, is that government effectively caps it? You know, they basically tranche it, and they tranche out the most difficult to insure part of the equation. And I'm talking to government about that. Sorry, that has been a very, very long answer, but I just wanted to address all of the issues, because I know that sometimes it has become politicized, and clearly it's a very sensitive issue for the constituency. So I just wanted to give you all of the detail behind what I've been doing and what is going on.
Great summary, Felicity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felicity. So there was a follow-up question to that from Claire, just asking if the package of support is going to be limited to just cladding materials, or will it apply to a kind of other combustible materials as well?
So it is limited to cladding. And again, that wasn't chosen randomly. That was what the fire risk assessors have told us is the really significant danger to those buildings. But, you know, it does show the extent of the problem that we're talking about 5 to 10 billion on cladding. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Michelle, I think you've got another question.
No, I didn't have one actually.
Okay, sorry for that. So Felicity, youth unemployment at the moment is, I think, 16% in London. for 16 to 24-year-olds. Are there any kind of plans for the government to try and get the young people into employment?
Well, I think that's a very good question from whoever asked it. I get very, very concerned about youth employment, and I've got a lot of friends who have got children who are leaving university, and even if they're very, very well qualified with good degrees from top-class universities, they are finding it very, very difficult. And if you look at coronavirus, coronavirus has had a very high and disproportionate impact on the under 25-year-old sector. Now, a lot of that is because they were working in retail, hospitality, leisure, but there's no question it's had a huge impact. So that is why we have set up the Kickstart scheme. So that is effectively government paying the wage bills of young people who are on benefits for 6 months. So if you've got businesses who are interested in that scheme, we can definitely help on the details. And then Rishi also announced on Sunday, but we don't have the details, of packages of support for businesses to hire young people. And we'll be getting more detail on that tomorrow. So Kickstart scheme, that's government paying for 6 months of wages. That's already up and running. I actually had a call about 4 to 6 weeks ago with the job centre in North Kensington, and they said that they were already making a lot of placements under that scheme. A lot of the placements were actually into gyms, which obviously have been closed, but they seem to think that that scheme was going well, and further announcements tomorrow. But it is a very, very important issue.
Yeah, so actually the Chamber of Commerce is actually registered as a Kickstart gateway. We've got 92 candidates going through the process at the moment, hopefully kind of ending up with jobs. So that's we're doing our bit in that as well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
So next I have a question from Costas.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I'm a wealth management consultant and speak to people about their finances every day. People ranging from earning just £25,000 to £250,000 and quite a lot of wealth. I firstly wanted to say to Felicity that I totally agree on your stamp duty policy and indeed the wealth tax being unacceptable. And also agree with digital service taxes having to be implemented, and big internet companies tax as well. So I applaud you and your team for trying to push that through. But really I wanted to talk about corporation tax and also residential housing development regulations, and have a couple of questions surrounding those two issues. Firstly, would there be any merit in discussing maybe a tiered corporation tax system whereby corporations could be taxed according to their size, so that small to medium-sized enterprises and smaller enterprises are not penalized by having the additional 24 or up to, I think you mentioned 28% tax, and implementing criteria there? That's the first question.
Yes, I don't think it's going to go as high as 28%. Some papers have mentioned 25%. I've heard 23%, but I just don't know. But in terms of a tiered approach, I think that's interesting. I think that's something that we should definitely look into. It's not going to be in tomorrow's budget unless the Chancellor has independently thought of it. Yes, but but it's definitely something it's worthwhile looking into. Thank you for the suggestion, and I'll definitely give it some thought. Yes.
Marvelous. And the next question is about residential housing development regulations. I know that there's a lot to be put right after the Grenfell fallout, and I know we all probably feel very strongly about it. But thinking ahead, have there been any amendments to regulations as to new build homes being safe fire retardant, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a critically important point. So our building safety bill will be coming to Parliament imminently, and that sets out the framework for all new buildings, and essentially all new buildings will have to be approved by a new buildings regulator. So every single one will need to be signed off by that buildings regulator, and that will put in place the process. And I believe we've just appointed, and sorry, the name escapes me, the person who will be the new buildings regulator, but there's a very, very detailed scheme of action, and it's critically important that we get that right.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Felicity and Michael.
Right. Thank you, Felicity. So a quick question. I know everybody's going to be going back to work, hopefully in their offices and back to the shops, and Kensington, Chelsea High Street is going to be really busy. Most people have got to get there by London Transport. So I believe London Transport is only funded for another 29 days. And then there's going to be another kind of shouting match about the kind of long-term funding of it. So how are we going to have confidence in having kind of lots of tube trains running and buses running when people are trying to get back to work and be safe?
Yes, and I'm actually going to bring in Tony on this one, but let me just make a quick remark from central government's perspective. Central government will give TfL money to keep them going where they have lost money as a result of coronavirus. But TfL has been hopelessly mismanaged, and central government is not going to bail out all of their failures in terms of the past mismanagement, but central government will give a settlement such that losses as a result of coronavirus will be covered, and so that the tube system can stay up and running. And then it was Claire, I think, who made the point about confidence in public transport, and I think that is critically important also. But Tony is the man on TfL.
Thank you, Felicity. I think I just agree, as always, with every word you say. You put it very succinctly. One thing I would say, just to reassure business, because it is all about reassurance. You and I have spent most of the last year on reassuring businesses and individuals in the constituency. I can guarantee you that the TfL will be funded. There's no doubt about it. Government will not let TfL not be funded. But Felicity is absolutely right. If you look at any independent survey of public sector pay, or indeed pay across industry, TfL workers, and I love TfL workers, from senior managers to working level, they are incredibly well paid, and it's their package of other benefits. They have gold-plated pensions that make the NHS pension or the MOD pension look ungenerous. They win every single award, literally, in terms of the best place to work, the shortest working hours and everything else. And there has to be change. And Mr. Khan has got to take on the unions. There will be tough negotiations between the Department of Transport and TfL. There has to be real substantial change, because all Mr. Khan has done, he's cut all the really important infrastructure upgrades. For example, the Bakerloo line extension. He's failed to get the Elizabeth line open for 2 years running late. And I could go on, but I won't. So there's lots of work to be done. And I can assure you the government will make sure there is a deal as we go back to work. Because one thing I would like to finally say on TfL, COVID, one of the awful things to say, the only good thing virtually in London that's come out of COVID is our buses and tubes, which were filthy, frankly, if you sat on them before COVID. They are so deep cleaned now that they are completely clean and completely safe. There is no COVID on the underground. There's been really detailed tests on this. So it is safe for your employees to come back as soon as we actually get the go-ahead between now and the 21st of June. Thank you, Felicity.
Thank you, Tony and Felicity. Can I just add kind of Hammersmith Bridge into the equation here? So it's not in Kensington, Chelsea, but it's not that far away. But it's causing kind of massive inconvenience for lots of people who are living in West London who want to maybe come to Kensington, Chelsea and go shopping. What's going to happen with Hammersmith Bridge?
Again,
Well,
I'm going to pass that to Tony.
that is my number one issue. I literally, what I have done, particularly with Greg Hands, who is the neighbouring member of Parliament and government, is it's owned by Hammersmith Council. They have completely refused to pay a penny so far. It has been shut to motorised transport since April of 19, so 2 years this April. It completely shut to pedestrians and cyclists in August. It is a scandal. So what I have done is, after months and months of pushing with Greg and with the local Conservative councillors, we've got Charlotte Veer, Transport Minister. She is now committed, running a task force with TfL and with the council, but she is leading it, and we are dragging, kicking and screaming. I've worked with Hammersmith and Fulham Council for 15 years. I'm afraid Mr. Cowan is not my favourite politician. He doesn't listen to Stephen Cowan, the Labour leader of the council. They are going to have to pay something, but the government is going to pick up the majority of the bill. We are pushing hard. The ferry is almost operational. It's meant to be operational in March. It is now slipped a couple of months, but there will be a ferry quickly. We need a temporary bridge, then as quickly as possible, then a permanent bridge. But it is a 1860s bridge. It was bombed by the IRA twice in the 90s and 80s. You know, it is a big engineering job, but I can assure you, I push on this every single day. And I spoke to the Minister and Greg Hands only a couple of days ago.
Yes, so I think most kind of residents in the area and the kind of businesses in Kensington, Chelsea would just like it to be fixed rather than kind of lobbing it around.
Sure.
I think there's another question from Michelle about jobs. I think this will be the last one. I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah, this is just going over what Felicity was saying earlier about jobs, and clearly some of these questions may come up in the budget tomorrow. But it's interesting that you have said that there is a commitment to support real jobs, and lots of graduates are coming out finding it difficult to find work and the most appropriate work. I think what is disappointing is that the government seems to be very committed to supporting perhaps the wrong types of enterprises. If you look at the gig economy, for example, they are given so much support so that they can actually operate in the UK, and you have to think about the phenomenal amount of jobs that they create that are not, you know, jobs of quality, and this has caused all the problems. And obviously you've heard about the Supreme Court hearing sort of a week or so ago. So what I want to understand is what the government is actually doing to support real jobs, whether the worker is under 25 or over 25. What about the real jobs with proper training, real career progression, you know, advanced training that goes well beyond the basic training? Because I can tell you, when I graduated from university, which was a long time ago, there was hope. You know, there were structured graduate training schemes. Even if you weren't a graduate, you could actually, you know, grow within a company. You could actually be part of management. You could, you know, go up the career career ladder. I mean, at the moment, it just seems that those jobs have just evaporated, and there's been an obsession with a get-rich-quick mentality and the creation of all of these low-skilled jobs. So you've got these poor graduates who have studied at fantastic universities, and they've basically got no options. And we as small businesses are able to create those opportunities, but we get very, very little support. I mean, the only support I can actually say has come our way has been Kickstart. But I can tell you, a lot of us were not even granted the Kickstart opportunity. It's only been recently that we have been given the opportunity. So I want to understand really what the government is doing about, you know, really bridging the gap, leveling up, not just for students, but also for businesses who are not giving the opportunity to pitch for contracts or be involved and contribute.
Well, I agree with you that we do need good quality jobs, and it's very, very important that we do focus on training and on skills. And government has announced a number of packages in terms of, separate from Kickstart, in terms of investing money on training. So Michelle, maybe if you send us your email, I can get back to you on the specific training programs and what support is available. But I don't know if many people on the call heard the Chancellor being interviewed by Andrew Marr on Sunday, but one of his big themes was it was jobs, 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 and it was training and jobs for young people. So definitely it has got the focus of the Chancellor, but I'll revert to you in terms of specific schemes.
Thank you, Felicity. So I think we've got one final question then from Maria Stedman, and then we'll draw things to a close. Look, you're on mute, I'm afraid.
I just wanted to come back about the self-employed schemes, because there is actually a self-employed scheme which, you know, the director's income scheme is based upon, and Rebecca Seeley-Harris has been quite involved in that in terms of trying to get figures that are, and systems and schemes that are could be potentially parallel to that, which would eliminate any of the kind of element of fraud. I mean, I guess there could be an element of fraud in the Thurlow scheme and many of the other schemes. So, I mean, I'm just wondering if, and I know Forgotten and Excluded and various groups like that have been putting forward these, you know, which are fairly watertight proposals. And I'm just wondering if they're going to be looked at any point. And just a second point is really about the guidelines from government for discretionary schemes for local authorities. I mean, there seems to be, local authorities are coming back saying, for example, in Westminster as well, they're saying that healthcare professionals haven't been included, and that's at government instigation, really. It's not down to them in terms of the discretionary element of it.
Okay, so in terms of government extending the reach of the schemes, I've just got to be honest, I think that we're near the end of government support. It will probably, I would imagine, go on until June, 3 months, I would have thought. That's not me knowing that. That's me just thinking we're coming out of lockdown fully on June the 21st. I don't see them tinkering with the schemes at this late stage. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but I just want to be honest with you. I think that if there were going to be amendments made to these schemes, they would have been done by now. In terms of the local authority discretionary schemes, yes, every scheme comes with different parameters that are set by central government, the parameters. They differ depending upon the scheme. I don't know off the top of my head if the latest ones have allowed payments to healthcare or not. But I can ask someone in my office to check that. But different schemes do have different parameters. That's all I would say. And then within the parameters, then the local authorities have got flexibility as to whom they're going to prioritize. But yeah, we can certainly come back to you. If you want to email my office, then someone will get back to you. And we'll put it on the chat box. In fact, I think Gemma's just doing that as we speak. But my email is just the parliamentary one. So it's felicity.buchan.mp and then @parliament.uk. But any specific questions, someone in my office can follow up on.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Felicity. So finally, can I just bring in Andrew Boyd of BGM Accountants? So Andrew, it's going to budget day tomorrow. Presumably you'll be up all night typing a budget summary to send out to all your clients.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you, Felicity, for your time. It's been very interesting, and for the Chambers for giving us all an opportunity to ask Felicity some questions. And as Michael was hinting, as a tax professional, I'm even more excited for tomorrow's budget than I was already.
Great, thank you.
So it sounds as though it might be expensive for the smaller businesses and the corporation tax front. We will see. Felicity, thank you very much. Would you like to any closing comments?
No, just to say, great to see you all. And I will also be on the line with Paul Scully on Thursday, the 25th of March. So hopefully see a few of you there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Felicity.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to just say thank you everyone for participating, especially Andrew Boyd from BGM, who sponsors the Chamber. Felicity, thank you very much. And I also see Dale Allen from HSBC there, who are sponsor the Chamber as well. Thank you to you all, and we will see you at the next event. And thank you very much to Felicity from all of us. Thank you.